For 40 blessed years, the Inside Edge has hosted more than 1,700 speakers, and the Mastery Circle, so many more. We've had the profound privilege of welcoming this extraordinary soul to the Inside Edge and the Mastery Circle, and each time his presentations have woven together a magnificent patchwork quilt of consciousness and spirituality, each square a different hue, each thread connecting us more deeply to our truest selves. So I'm really excited. I want to read you a few of the titles that he has spoken about, that books that he has written. American Veda, from Emerson and the Beatles to yoga and meditation, how Indian spirituality changed the West, the life of Yogananda, the story of the first modern guru, spiritual practice for crazy times, and his latest Karmic Relief, harnessing the laws of cause and effect for a joyful, meaningful life. So this is going to be really exciting. I haven't really seen a book on karma, and there's nobody that could possibly explain this better with his long life of contribution to the world of all the things that the Inside Edge and the Mastery Circle love, and all about consciousness. So I very warmly welcome the amazing Philip Goldberg.
Thank you, Diana. Anybody ever needs an ego boost, get Diana to introduce you. You're very generous. Um, and I'm happy to be back. I'm now on the East Coast, so it is a reasonable hour of morning for me. And happy to see all your early morning faces. Um, I have been influenced by the concept of karma for, well, ever since I first heard about it more than 50 years ago, when I first set foot on my own spiritual path and started to devour the spiritual teachings that came to us from the East. Um, at first, karma was a secondary sort of concept. The main thing I wanted was, who am I? What's going on in the world? How do I connect with the rest of the world? What does it mean to be spiritual? How does it differ from religion, which I had no interest in? And how is it going to transform my life? I was a practical guy. As I dove into the teachings in the course of my own path and my professional life, karma kept coming up. It's a fascinating idea to consider from just an objective point of view, as a sort of any thinking person may want to ask themselves, is the universe a fair and um, just place? Or as Einstein said, is it a friendly place? Is there justice in the universe? Do we really reap what we sow? Do our actions come back to us in some form or another, as the theory of karma suggests? Does what goes around comes around? Is it true that what goes around comes around? And on the surface, it's hard to make that case. In some ways, it's obvious. There's a cause and effect relationship between our actions and our experience in some cases, and the obvious ones. If you don't take care of yourself, you're likely to get sick. If you run a red light, you might get a speeding ticket, or you might get away with it, depending on circumstances. If you insult somebody, chances are you'll have some repercussion. If you're careless, you might have an accident. So cause and effect is operable in the world, but karma goes beyond that to say that everything that happens to us, every event that we experience has antecedents. Depend that what we've done, said, and thought in the past has brought us to this moment. And that everything we do now in the present is creating waves of influence that will come back to us in some form or another in a related way in the future. What karma doesn't say, and this is one of the many misconceptions about it, is that we can identify what happened in the past that brought us to this moment that created these conditions. Sometimes it's obvious. We lie to somebody, they found out, they're angry. That's obvious. But most of the things that happen, ordinary life occurrences, the tragedies, the upsets, the surprises, they too, according to the theory of karma, have antecedents in the past. But it's not that you can connect a one-to-one, this happened, now this happened. Life is far too complicated for that. Our relationships come into play, the karma of the people around us and the people in our families, in our friendship circles, in our professions, natural events, floods, hurricanes, all that, everything comes together in such a complicated fashion that um, it's a fool's errand to try to say, this is happening now because I must have done that in a past life, or I must have done this when, I was a teenager. That's one of the misconceptions. Um, and I mentioned misconceptions. I'm digressing a bit. Um, I've been thinking about the subject of karma, and I have to say that the new book, Karmic Relief, um, I started using that expression back when you remember when Comic Relief, there was a series of TV specials with Billy Crystal and Robin Williams and my cousin Whoopi, where they raised money. And I thought at the time, I started saying karmic relief, and I thought it was clever. And then I realized years later that would make a good book title. And so the subject would obviously be karma. Is there a need for that? And I kept putting it aside and not doing it. But my wife and my now deceased agent kept saying, why don't you do that book on karma? It's a great title. So eventually I did. And one of the reasons I did was the term, I started to notice the term being used more and more frequently, not just in everyday conversations with people like you who know what it means and may, take it seriously, but in sitcoms, on the news, on sports reports. The Dodgers have really good karma. The Jets have terrible karma. You know, in advertising, names of products, and especially in popular music. Taylor Swift has a song titled Karma. So does Alicia Keys. It shows up in titles of songs far more often than you think it does. So I noticed this, but I also noticed that the term was often misused and understood in a very naive way and an incomplete way, and that there are misconceptions. So that's why I chose to write the book. And one of the misconceptions is um, it's not necessarily a misconception, but more a misuse. It shows up when something bad happens. Something unwanted happens, some tragedy, some upheaval, and people say, well, it's that person's karma. Or if it happens to us, it's like, what is my karma? Why is this happening to me? In the popular music, it's all usually, um, you've done me wrong and now karma's going to get you. It's going to come back to you. But we forget that all the good stuff, all the blessings, all the pleasures, all the joys, those too are a result of karma, only they're what we think of as good karma. We think of them as re rewards as opposed to punishments, which is another misconception because we should not. It's not a good idea to think of karma as a system of rewards and punishments. It's not like there's a magistrate, supreme being, who knows when you've been naughty and knows when you've been nice and and is like saying, okay, this is now going to happen to you, and now, okay, you did good, now you this, here's your reward. It's not like that. It's more like physics. Karma is understood, and one of the reasons it's appealing to so many of us in the West is it doesn't involve belief in a deity who judges everything. It's more like a scientific principle, like the laws of nature. It's very much like one of the laws of thermodynamics, that every action has an equal and opposite reaction. Only here we're not talking only about material objects. We're talking about our actions, our there's moral and ethical overtones to it. And it suggests that everything we do, and I'll add, it's not just everything we do, it's everything we say, everything we think, everything we intend. All that matters in the creation of karmic consequences. But it's more like our actions and our speech emit vibration. It's a vibrating universe. Physics tells us this. And it also tells us that everything is connected. This is unequivocal science at this point. Everything is connected, everything is vibration. So our actions and our thoughts set out vibrations that have effects, immediate effects, distant effects, long-term effects. They have consequences, large and small. But what karma then adds is that the vibrations come back to us in a way that's similar to or like in character the actions that that are the cause of those effects. It comes back to us. Can't predict it, don't know when. And that's why it's a little hard for people to believe in it. Go back to my own history with it. I resisted it for a long time because I cared about the world and I saw people suffering. And for the same reason, I rejected the standard religious framework that tries to explain why bad things happen to good people and good things happen to bad people as mysterious, God works in mysterious ways. There's a whole school of theology devoted to sorting out how a God that knows everything, that's omniscient, and also is good, is goodness by nature, can allow for the suffering of virtuous people. And that was just too obvious. Bad people don't always get caught. They die happy and live long lives in many cases. Or do they? Because one of the theories is maybe internally they're suffering in ways we can't imagine. And they don't get the love, respect, and uh, the things we want from relationships and our social lives. Who knows? But it makes it a little hard, and especially hard if you don't include in the framework of karma the possibility of reincarnation or rebirth, because it doesn't seem on the surface that the consequences, good and bad, of our actions play out and return to us in the one life we're aware of. So reincarnation turns our existence from you get to go to first grade and then everything else is determined and in that one school year of one life. You get to come back and you get to learn and you get to grow and you get to uh, correct your mistakes from the past. And so it's a developmental model over eons. And that's a better way to think about karma than as a system of reward and punishment. It's a system of cause and effect on a very deep vibrational level. And it's less of a judicial system than an educational one. Everything that happens can be understood as a lesson, part of the curriculum you signed up for, and that you are determining by your actions. Things come back to you, a blessing. Oh, how can I use this to create additional good karma going forward? Something you don't want, something that causes pain or suffering or a disappointment. What is the lesson in this? And when stuff repeats over and over again, as we are all familiar with, we say, oh, why is this happening to me again? Why am I having the same argument with my spouse that I've been having for 30 years? Why, why did I make the same mistake in my business? Why is this happening? Sometimes we fail to learn the proper lesson and we make the same mistakes, do the same things, and karma keeps repeating itself. Though there's clues in that about how we can learn the right lessons, change our actions, transform ourselves, and move forward. The point is, karma is not destiny, it's not fatalism. It puts the responsibility for our lives squarely on our shoulders, and it compels us to keep learning, keep growing, and keep course correcting if we want to have better karma going forward. Karma points to the past in that everything that happens is based on the karma that's accumulated from the past. And it points to the future in the sense that what you do now is going to affect your future, the karmic events that happen in the future. But it places us squarely in the present at all times. It doesn't, it doesn't necessarily ask us to analyze the past, except in limited ways like, did I do something yesterday or am I habitually doing something? But it puts us back right in the present. What can I do now to ameliorate the effect of any unwanted karma in this moment? And how can I act in this moment, in the present, and the next hour and the next day to create better karmic consequences going forward? That's the ultimate takeaway from understanding the laws of karma. It doesn't answer the question, is karma real? I'm talking about it as if it is, but can I prove it? Certainly not. I have friends who, think I'm nuts to even consider the possibility that every action has an equal and opposite reaction, that there's karma from the past, let alone future lives and past lives. I can't convince them, except in a limited way. If I slap you in the face, you're going to do something. There's going to be a consequence. And I don't want to convince. I didn't write Karmic Relief to convince people that karma was real. I cannot prove it. And I understand completely why people would be skeptical of it, or at least be unwilling to accept it entirely. There are people who will accept it on a limited basis and say, okay, I can believe that karma operates in a cause and effect way, but in a limited way. It doesn't explain everything. Well, can't prove it. Maybe someday physics will prove it, but I don't expect to live to see that day. Where I came down in my own life, and then, when I decided to write this book, is it started to become increasingly plausible to me that the universe operated this way, that their fairness and justice play out over the long term in our lives, and that we get what's coming to us based on what we've done in the past. And we can change that. We can improve that going forward. We can learn from it. Again, I can't prove it, but it started to become more and more plausible. And with every discovery in physics that confirms that everything in the universe is connected and everything is vibrational, it became more and more plausible to me. And the more the affiliated teachings and the spiritual practices that I engaged in uh, took hold in my life, it felt intuitively true. But again, beyond proof, beyond the, the evidence I can marshal. And all the scholars and all the, sages and swamis and Buddhist masters who talk about karma come out in the same place. You can argue for it, you can argue against it. But I came down finally to say, if I have a choice, I can act as if karma is real and true and the way things work, or I can say, nope, I if no one catches me, I can do whatever I want and get the short-term benefits from it. I choose to act as if karma is real because if assuming it's real, giving it the benefit of the doubt means I'll make smarter choices. I'll make more virtuous choices. I'll make choices that do some good in the world because they're less selfish, more generous, more kind. I may do it for selfish reasons because I want the karmic benefit of it, but I can't argue with the fact that, on some level, even the most generous person is also out for him or herself and is in their own welfare and the welfare of those they love. And I think, we are better off if we assume that karma is real. And then certain things happen and yeah, it's karma. And I better act as if it were real. So that leads to the question, well, I'll say I organized karmic relief at the request of my editor. I gave a historical overview of the idea of karma, the theory of it, how it evolved over centuries, and what it truly means, what it means and what it doesn't mean, the misconceptions people have about it, the misuses, and so forth. But then I went into the prescriptive part of the book, which is most of it, of to answer the question, if karma is real, what are the implications in our lives? How can we create better karma going forward? And there I took a, a spiritual perspective. Every religious tradition, many secular uh, thinkers as well, have addressed the question of ethics and morality. How are we to behave in the world? And if you frame that with the concept of karma, the question becomes, how do we behave in the world to create a better life for ourselves, our loved ones, and so forth? If our actions have consequences, what are the ways of acting? What are the ways of being that will create good karma for us going forward? And by implication, uh, not just for ourselves personally, but for those we care about, our workplace, our communities, our societies, our civilization, the planet. Um, and so we have ethical codes. I chose to focus on the codes that came to us from the traditions in which karma is understood to be true and real, as opposed to Western concepts of ethics. There's, of course, tremendous overlaps, as many of you already know. Something like the Golden Rule exists in every religious tradition, every spiritual pathway, and so forth. Every code of ethics includes, not to be violent to others, not to kill, not to steal, not to lie. There's do's and don'ts that are pretty universal. But then there are nuances, and the nuances I chose to explore in the book as guidelines. I wanted to focus on the traditions that uh, extol karma as a framework because it those codes, those guidelines are different from what we're often accustomed to in certainly in Western religions, but also in legal, and secular codes. Um, and the main difference is if you look at, say, the yamas and niyamas in the yogic tradition, or what we think of as Hinduism, or you look at the paramitas and other configurations in the Buddhist system, also true of Jains, but I didn't go into that much. You find that we're given by the sages and the authorities from the past not commandments. This is not the Ten Commandments. They're not do this, don't do this, or you will be punished. I command you. They're more like guidelines. They're like, if you want to grow spiritually, if you want to become spiritually liberated, if you want your you and your loved ones to have happy lives, content lives, uh, fulfilling lives, here's some guidelines. One of the things I like about those traditions is I'm a big fan of the Bhagavad Gita, and I've given uh, workshops and classes on the Gita, maybe even for Inside Edge. I don't even remember. But one of the things I like about it is, and those of you who are familiar with it now, it's a dialogue between Lord Krishna, who represents, cosmic wisdom, and Arjuna, who's a great warrior about to go to battle and to defeat evil. Um, and Krishna gives him the most concise and clear summary of all of what we think of as Indian philosophy or yoga philosophy. All the Upanishads sort of like condensed in this discourse. And at the end, having given Arjuna all these guidelines about how to become spiritually liberated and how he should behave in the world according to his duties and responsibilities, he then says, I have given you this knowledge. Now make your decision. It's up to you. And I remember reading that and saying, oh, thank you. I still have free will. No one's asking me to, no one's forcing me to do anything. It's our choice. And the guidelines of that we think of as ethical codes are more like suggestions. This is what we find to be true. Take it or leave it. Apply it to your lives as best you can. There's room for interpretation. There's room for personalizing these guidelines. Go do your best, see what works. And those are what I included in karmic relief. And you'd be surprised at how nuanced they are and how subject to interpretation they are. And they're not just behavior. It's not just do this, don't do this. Included in what has been loosely called, ethical guidelines are things like uh, qualities to cultivate, virtues to cultivate, ways of being to encourage in your life. So it's not just don't steal and don't, and it's not just be truthful, which are in there. And it's not just ahimsa, do no harm, nonviolence, don't do violence, which is probably the core of the um, do's and don'ts. But it's also things like purity, to purify your body, your mind, and your speech. Uh, it's also not just be generous, but to cultivate the quality of generosity. So generous action becomes automatic to you. It's not just don't steal, it's cultivate an attitude of non-greed, non-covetousness. So you won't even be tempted to take what doesn't belong to you. It tells you to cultivate qualities like contentment and self-discipline and discernment. So those are do's and don'ts of a very subtle kind because everything is constructed in layers. And I construct, the chapters in the book in this way. Um, what we do, the decisions we make, the actions we take, and the words we speak, they have roots in the mind and in the heart. So what we do and say is based on what we've thought, how we felt, our emotions, our ideas, our perspectives, our perceptions. So the Eastern traditions turn us in that direction. Cultivate right thinking, as the Buddhists say. Cultivate right perception. See clearly. Don't corrupt your actions with violent emotions or anger or resentment. Work on the mind and the heart so your actions become automatically right, spontaneously right. So qualities like compassion and generosity and kindness aren't forced and artificial. Of course, you fake it till you make it is a good idea. And if you have a choice about being generous or not generous, or kind and not kind, it's good to make those choices. The obvious choice, the karmically good choice. But sometimes we don't even think about it. We just act, we just say what comes out of our mouths. But if you cultivate the inner state of more pure mind and heart, of a content state of being, you're more likely to behave on the outer level in a way that creates good karma. You know this from your personal experience. If you're feeling needy, if you're feeling angry, if you're feeling incomplete, if you have a strong craving for something or desire for something, uh, you're more likely to behave unkind or non-generous or non-compassionate. And when you're feeling good and content and happy, kindness comes more naturally to you, more easily, in depending on the circumstances. So what we bring to our lives and our actions and our thoughts from the mental and emotional level is also what we need to work on. And then there's the spiritual level. a level of pure spirit that transcends all the rest, that transcends karma. Everything is karma in the material world, in the world of forms and substances and personalities and individuality and so forth. But in the realm of spirit, where everything is one, that is our true nature. That's beyond karma. And so, an important part of the book, an important part of reflecting the teachings that I drew from, uh, is spiritual practices. That's what affect and purify and cultivate the states of mind and emotion that lead to virtuous actions in the world and virtuous speech. Spiritual practices, and you, as you all know, there's a huge inventory of spiritual practices available to all of us. For me and others, meditation is sort of a cornerstone of a good spiritual repertoire, and you see that reflected because regular spiritual practice tends to make us more content, tends to make us more, give us a greater clarity of mind. It tends to make us more compassionate, more heartfelt. And so there are layers to the consideration of how to create good karma in our lives. And then, of course, there's the layer of us as uh, individual members of a society, a community, a country, and what our karmic responsibilities might be there. And then that comes down to individual considerations of what is our skill set, what are our priorities, what are our responsibilities, but that too factors in to the creation of good karma. So that's an overview of why I wrote the book, what I've been thinking about, what I discovered in my research, and what might be in it for you to look into it further than this short talk. So I'm happy to turn it over to discussion, questions, comments, whatever, in our remaining time. Am I moderating or
Yes,
ha-
yes, you are.
oh, okay.
You
So I
can just,
see Patricia's hand up.
yes. No, I was going to say something where you just mentioned it in the last paragraph, how that I see karma as intrinsically related to community. Whatever I do affects the community. Whatever the community does affects me, and also on individual levels. So
Yes.
it's all intertwined. Um, and also there is the vibrational frequency. I mean, that's scientifically known that it's it's a fact. Yeah.
Science hasn't yet taken us to the point where where it's provable that our thoughts have consequences out in the world. But I think that's probably coming,
But
you know.
in the vibrational level, they are starting to see.
That's right.
I listen to even experts in neuroscience that they are
Yes.
starting to accept that it's the
It
vibrational
becomes more and more reasonable
effect.
all the time. Look, I press a button on this thing. I type in a text. Somebody halfway around the world instantaneously, almost, gets that message. How did something is vibrating out into the universe, and then a response comes back. So how different is this than the electrical activity of the brain? It's just a matter of time before those things can be measured and proven.
Yeah.
Thanks, Patricia. Christine?
Yeah, and on that, I always look at patterns. And if you think about like the water cycle, you know, that shows that there's recreation or reincarnation. But I have a question about, and I've never really thought about it this way, and thank you for this talk, but about intent. So
Yeah.
if karma, if my aunt, my soul mother, was a Buddhist nun in her later life, and we talked a lot about karma, but never this really. So if you're doing something with the intent of reincarnation to a higher being, or enlightenment, then how does that, where, you know, the generosity of spirit, the grace, and I mean this really respectfully, but you know, what are your thoughts on that intent versus just
Okay.
doing it because?
There's a whole section in the book about intent. And one of the things I was surprised to discover is that in both the Buddhist world and the Hindu world and the Jain world, there's intent really matters. It matters in some thinkers' mind more than your actions. But think about it, it makes perfect sense. We know this intuitively. If somebody uh, hurts somebody physically, there's a big difference, even in the law, whether they did it accidentally or intentionally, right?
Absolutely.
There's
Yes,
murder in the first degree.
I have
Yeah,
personal experience from that. This is so
sure. I mean, you know, if you're a parent, you know, oh, one of your kids hurts the other. It's a big difference whether they did it intentionally to hurt the person or just bumped into them or didn't realize, you know, that if they threw the ball too hard, the kid's going to get hurt. Our intent
But if your
matters.
my question is, if your intention is for the goal is for the goal of getting to a higher place in your being, does how does that jive with the intent of just walking every step through life in a, you know, the
Let's be
target
real.
versus the existence?
On some level, isn't all of our intent to grow to a higher level?
I don't know. That's, I guess
Don't
that's my
we, isn't that, you know, sort of built in to what we think and what we do? It's an evolutionary imperative. We all want to grow. But if you're that's a different thing from consciously saying, I'm going to do this because it's going to accrue to my karmic benefit.
Right.
Or I'm going to do this because that person is suffering and needs something. There may be a difference there. I'm not sophisticated enough to know, but I would much rather have somebody act kindly and compassionately because they want good karma for themselves than to be indifferent or callous. You know, the best thing, and all the teachings will say this, is when we act charitably and kindly and compassionately automatically because we're responding from an open heart to what's needed in the moment. And that's something to aspire to, but does it make a difference? How much of a difference does it make karmically? That's one of the reasons the Bhagavad Gita says that karma is unfathomable. There's no formula for these things. There's just ideals and guidelines. But somebody who's acting for the sake of benefit in a future life may want to think about the more immediate effects of their actions as well. It's good to have long-term thinking, but
Yeah.
Thank you, Philip. We need to wrap up, and I see two hands up.
Oh, sure.
Can you
Yeah.
guys be brief, please? Paul?
Yeah, who's
Okay, I have
Paul?
a very brief one. It was on the White Album by the Beatles. And at the end, it said, only kindness matters. Only kindness matters.
Or as my grandmother used to say, be nice.
Just, you know,
And the love you take is equal to the love you make.
There you go.
Diana.
My question is much too complex, so I won't do that. I just want to say how grateful I am that you tackled this subject. If I were asked to speak about karma, it would be a very short speech because it's really elusive being able to define it. And I loved what you said about purity too. That word really shines as far as an aspiration. But I was going to ask something too complicated. But I'm so grateful for you, Philip. I think
Send me an email.
Yeah, I will.
Perhaps you can come back, and then you can talk the whole hour.
Let's start with my question.
Diana's question, yes. But thank you so much, Philip. Great presentation.
Thank you all.
this was really, really wonderful. Thank you so much, Phil. I
Thanks.
personally really appreciate your perspective on karma and agree with it, incidentally. And I will send out an
That's good.
email with information about your book and any classes or workshops you have going on. Thank you so
Good.
much. Love
Thank
having
you all.